So we made a bunch of GUI code yesterday, and the typical thing with GUI code is that it makes more sense to run it and see what it produces rather than trying to figure out what the code does. So it's better to go see the visual and work backwards to the code. So there's what we've got so far. A button that doesn't do anything that says, hey, which is really quite exciting. Okay. So that we worked on the bits and pieces of this thing to try to understand what you had to do to talk to the GUI to get it to that point. So the J frame is the thing that makes basically the exterior of the beast. Have to set the size to give the frame some particular size. Set location relative to null really means center it on the screen. Set layout, the flow layout is going to make stuff we place in here basically go top to bottom, left to right, or I guess left to right, top to bottom. And then we started adding things onto the list. So for instance, just for fun, let's turn around and let's make another button here. I guess I should kill that old one off. So we'll make another button, steal list code. Oops. So there's another button. And make sure that not only do you add the one button, but you always have to dump the button into the frame in order to get it to work. So now we'll have two buttons on there. Save it and run it, and now there's two buttons. And so here's what flow layout does for you. As this thing gets smaller, then all of a sudden when they can't fit anymore, it just drops it down. Right? And so it's like I say, it's the easiest one to manage. You don't really, when you start out, it doesn't really matter visually where they are as long as the buttons are someplace in that frame. That's a good place to start. Okay, so now we've got it so that it can make another couple of buttons. What would you like to do with your button?
Make it sing a song.
Terminate the window.
Make it do something.
The simplest thing would be to just make it say something. Right, so I mean, we'll just put a print statement in, right? So I would like it so that if I press the button, it would magically spew a print statement out. Now, officially, print statements aren't going to be in the GUI at the end, but it'll still drop and show in the console, and we'll know that at least the button's being pressed. So now we have to go to a little bit of work in order to get that done. Let's start out at the sort of the far end of the spectrum here. The way that buttons work is sort of like the way that a comparator or a compare-to works. Okay, is that what you do is you make a class and you say here's the function inside the class that's going to be used whenever the button gets clicked. And then you take that whole object that you've created that's got the one method inside it, just like we did for comparators, and you hand that off and you say, here button, if the button never gets clicked, there's something inside this object that you can use to run. Okay? So we're going to play essentially the same trick that we did with that comparator function, which is why I showed it to you, is we're going to start out and we'll write a class that's used to hold the method that we need. So we'll call this hey button action class. And the trick here is to say, we need to say it's got some stuff in here that a button can use. So we're going to say implements action listener. And this idea of listeners is just basically a callback function. Right? It says there's a function inside here that you can use. So we'll use our bulb and get it to do the proper import. And notice that one came from good old AWT, so it's been around for a while. And then we'll add the unimplemented methods. And if you say that you're going to be an action listener, you have to have an action perform method inside you. So sort of the same idea as what we did for a comparator, right? It had to have a compare function. Action listeners have to have an action perform method. Doesn't really matter what this parameter is. All that I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my print statement in here. So the bottom line here is if the button never gets clicked, I want to print out something. Okay, so there's the function sitting there, action performed. It's inside this hey button object. And so now what we'll turn around and do is we'll go to the button and we'll say start button dot add action listener, and we'll give them a new one of those hey button action objects. Okay, so this thing says make one of those new things like this down below. It has that action perform method inside it, which it's advertising. And so now we'll pass that to the button and say, basically this says link the button up. Whenever the button gets clicked, I want you to run that action perform method. Okay, so we'll give that thing a try. There's our button, and we click on hey, and now we know it's hooked up. Okay, so now you can make the buttons actually do something. Let's hook up the other button in the same sort of way, just so that we can see it again. So instead of a hey button, this one would be the again button. And the action performed there is, we'll just change this thing to say again button. And for the again button, we'll steal this code to add the action listener and stuff it in after the again button and do an add action listener of a new again button. Okay, so once you've written one of them, they're all sort of the same. We can take this one and run it. And now there's our hey button being clicked. Oops, I did something wrong.
At the beginning of the line, it's supposed to start button.
Oh, I clicked them to the same place. Ha. I have two of them going to the same place. This should be start button, this should be again button. So notice I hooked two listeners up to the same one. So, and nothing up to the second button. So that'll be a little better. Hey button says hey, again button says again. Okay, so now you can perform some sort of action. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. So now we've got some buttons on there. Maybe a nice thing to do would be to display what song is currently being played. Okay. So let's make a something that's going to be non-editable text. We don't want the user to be able to change it. So that would be a JLabel. And this is going to be the title label for the song. So we'll make a new JLabel there. Some swing libraries. And labels need some text. What thing is keeping track of what song we're playing? Do it this way. current song is, who do we have to talk to of all the variables that we've got? Only got one. So in this case, the iPod is holding on to all of the songs. So we'll talk to my iPod, and we'll say get current song, and as much as I don't like double dot things, I'll do it anyway. Dot get title. Our songs have a title. Sorry, not get song, but get current song. Okay, and then in here for the label, we'll dump in the current song, and then we'll turn around and make sure that we add that label in someplace. I'm going to add it before the buttons. Like so, and we'll give that a try and see what happens. Oh, look, where'd the words no song come from?
You made it as a default if there's no.
That was the default if there was nothing to play, was no song. Okay. Well, let's change the hey button, instead of saying hey, to say forward. And the back button, we'll call it back. And I guess I should change the names of them too. Change that one to forward button, and change that one to back button. And I guess from, well, okay, we'll just do that. Okay, so now when the, I guess I better change this to forward button too, so I don't get confused, and this one to back button. Refactor only works so far. And we'll go up here and we'll change this to forward button. And this one to back button. Okay, so let's just see what it looks like. I just tried to make it a little better. So there's a go forward, and it now says forward button clicked, and back says back button clicked. So it makes a little bit more sense now. Okay, so what happens when you hit the forward button? What should you do here instead of printing? Should talk to the iPod, which I called what, my pod, and say to it, oh, I guess forward means play next song. Except now what's out of date visually?
The no song.
The no song thing on the label should now say the next song that's actually played. So what's the next song on the player? Well, we got it the first time with doing this. So I'm just going to steal this code here that said get it for the first time, and I'm going to plop it down into here, and we'll fix it up a little bit. So the current song, so we'll go retrieve the title of the current song from the player, and then what we'll do here is, rather than remaking that variable, we'll just make it with a new object instead. Okay, so the old object is going to disappear, and the new object will just replace it, so when it visually draws, it'll show whatever the new value is. Except that it doesn't understand title label there. Because if you look at where title label is. Title label was declared inside the main program or inside the constructor, so it's not visible to everything in the program, it's only visible inside this particular function. So the trick here, if you want to make it visible to everybody, is to take the title label, and instead of declaring it in this function, we're going to move it up and we're going to declare it at the start of the routine where everybody can see it like that. And then we'll get rid of the local definition that we had down below right here, so we don't have two variables with the same name like that. So that makes title label variable visible to everybody within the whole bounds of the class. Okay. So there we've got the title label, and we'll just see what happens when we run it. Oops, got more than one of them running. Hit forward. It's not changing.
I'll work before you broke it.
Oops. Instead of making a new label, let's try this. Turns out that there's a set text, so that's reuse the same object that you had and just change the text on it. There's our GUI, hit the forward button. Ooh, there's the names. What's it gonna do next?
Go back to the first.
Ooh. There we go. So there's all of the songs going through them. Okay. So while we're at it, I guess we might as well do the back button, because that seems fairly easy. So we'll go here and we'll stuff in something for the back button, and that's now play previous song, and then we'll get the title and then we'll set it. Okay, so this is actually fairly typical of GUI code, that you always talk to whatever internal thing you have and you get it to change its state. And then you have to go and say, oh, okay, well, internally it's now different than it was than what I'm presenting visually. So now let me update the visual part of the thing to correspond to what I know about it is internally. Okay, so there's the change the internal state, and there's now make the visuals agree with what the internal part says, because they're now out of date, because the internal thing changed. And when you start looking at GUI code, the other thing that you discover in GUI code is that almost all of the stuff in the main programs is just setting up the visual experience. And if you want to find out what GUI code actually does, all of the work is buried inside these action listener classes. So if you want to see how the work is actually done, the only place you can ignore 90% of the code, and you can just go look for these things that say action performed, and you can go, okay, there's where the work is done to somehow talk to the thing and get the values and update the GUI. There's almost never any code in the main part of the program that does it.
Now you use what's called workflow to place the button? No,
Flow layout.
flow layout, yes.
Yeah.
Instead of using that, could you use like coordinate system to place buttons?
Yeah, there's one called grid layout where you can place it in specific places. There's another one that uses the north, south, east, west paradigm with the thing in the center. So you can say I want things at the top or the bottom or basically the left or the right, or use the space in the middle, right? And so you can have variations of only having top and bottom or only having left and right. And you can get them to expand and contract and play all sorts of games. So there's lots of different sort of visual styles, and typically for all of the ones you see, you know, like the dialog boxes always have a fixed layout. so that you know, everything is always positioned in the same place and it's always exactly that size, you can't expand it. And so there's a way of doing that particular one versus, you know, the other ones like the flow layout. But for setting things up, flow layout is just always the easiest one to use because it's pretty much going to guarantee that everything you see is going to magically appear there someplace. Okay?
Now, assuming the button just like defaultly accepts a mouse click, like that's just its preferred method of input, but could you actually like do like action event or something like that?
There's
Put a keyboard shortcut?
there's other sorts of listeners.
Oh, okay.
There's multiple variations of it. So there's a for some of the objects there's a key listener, right? So that you can go and listen to, you know, get every key as it's typed and take some action. And so sort of for every physical thing, there's a way of attaching a listener object to it to handle those requests. Okay, so we'll end up, you know, you would end up with a bunch more of them in this thing.
But the button does just like defaultly accept mouse clicks.
It accepts mouse clicks and then it calls whatever action listeners have been registered. So multiple people can register listeners on the same button if they want, or you see I accidentally registered the same listener twice. Okay, just that's fine. It doesn't care. Okay, so that listener concept appears all over the place, whether or not they call it a listener. So you'll see it as in Android, it's on click, you know, which has the same, so that on word on the front quite often in a lot of the GUI places they use it. I don't know if you've used it, there must be a JavaScript.
Yeah, we use
On
it
click,
once.
yes.
Yeah, we use it on click
Yeah,
once.
so on click is the same strategy. Just says if this thing ever happens, here's the code I want you to run to take care of it. Okay, let's see, what else can we do with this thing? Oh, well, let's just go look at our GUI again. So we can go forward and back if we want, but typically this thing probably wouldn't just be a single item. It would probably be a whole list of all of the items, right? So this is actually sort of hokey to go forward and back and only be able to see one. It would be nice to be able to see all of the songs that are on the player. Okay, so the thing that does that is a JList. So let's give a JList a try. And this time I'm going to get a little smarter because I figure I'm going to need it in a bunch of places and hook up action listeners or hook up whatever else. I'm going to say private JList, the song list, and then I'm going to make sure I initialize it someplace in here. Oh, what the heck, we'll put it, there's the frame, so we'll put it right there. Song list is a new JList. So we'll make our list and do the include statement. Got it. And let's just add the list temporarily in here so that we can see it. I'll put it before the label. And I broke my own rule about not putting the right name on it, so I'm just going to change that to song JList, just to remind me what it is. It's a visual element. Get that all updated. And let's just see what it draws for us. What the heck? Nothing. Pretty sure I added it. Okay. Well, let's just try going after we've made the list. Yeah, that's fine. see if we can fake it out here. So now we want to populate the list. That's the visual list, right, of things for the drop-down list or whatever it is. So where are all the songs being stored? And not in the array, but in the iPod. The iPod is holding the songs. So we're going to have to go through each song on the iPod and retrieve it. So let's just do that. We'll do it I don't think we wrote an iterator for this one, so we'll do it the long way. I equals 0. I is less than iPod dot size I plus plus. We'll go through every song that's on the iPod. So we'll talk to the iPod and we'll say, get me a song, thank you very much. And the position will be I. Then we'll drag out the title. And once we've got the title, we'll do song JList dot add. I think if I'm lucky here, I can say title. And if I'm not lucky, it won't take that. Now I have to just remember how I did it in the old days. So I'm going to go take a quick look here. Oh, ha. That's sort of silly, but that's okay. Let's just do this then. Let's get the list to work properly before we do this thing. So I'm just going to comment this out for a second and see if I can get my list to work. So we'll do this. We'll make a string array of song titles, new string, array, lists are a little strange because the easiest way to manipulate lists, sure, Jay, you know, why not, is to make a bunch of strings. And I can never remember my, there's my array syntax. So that just says make a bunch of strings, and then I'm going to populate the list with these fake strings to start with, and then I'll figure out how to get the real strings in there afterwards. Okay, so there's my list with a whole bunch of song titles in it, and that's probably going to have to say string just to make the compiler happy. And then we'll run that thing. And there's at least a bunch of names. Okay, so notice what happened is I was having trouble with getting the strings out of the thing, so I thought I'll just go do the simple thing here and go get some strings to start with to populate it. Okay, so now I know that if that's what I have to do, I'm just going to cut that thing out, move that thing down there, and I'm going to change this code to make my string array. Okay, so instead of making a string array like that, I'm going to make a new string array that will hold exactly the correct number of items. So So I'll make it to hold exactly 3 items in this case to start with. And now I'm going to go through all of the elements, and I'm going to turn around and I'm going to get the title, and I'm going to say song titles sub I is going to refer to that string. Okay? So instead of making the array with pre-populated stuff, I made an array that was now the right size, and I went through each one of the songs that was on my iPod, got the title, and dumped that into that song titles array. So I just filled the 0, 1, 2, 3 elements with all of the song titles. Okay? And then I knew that, oh, okay, if I had an array of strings, that I could just take this thing and make a list with that array of strings. So we'll do that. Give that one a go. And now I've got the actual names for the songs. And when you press the forward button, there's AA playing. Okay. And then forward again, and BB is playing, and then CC, and there's the song list. So that's the current song versus that's all of the complete list of songs. Okay, let's do one other thing here. I have to remember what that thing is. Scroll pane, got it. Let me just make my GUI go away here for a second. It turns out that if you look in this, GUI, one of the things that makes it not too pretty right now, and that's going to cause a problem, is that thing is a fixed size. That list is a fixed size, and eventually, if we had a few thousand songs in our player, at least we'd want a scrollable list that would show them all. So there's an easy way to turn that into a scrollable list. What you do here is, when you've got your JList, you make a JScroll pane. I'll just call it that for now. There's a new JScroll pane. And you pass it the song list, and you say, here, if that thing gets too large or too small, you can do the work of putting the scroll bars around it. And now, instead of adding, since now you've added the song list to the scroll pane, it's holding on to it visually. All that you have to do here is you never add the list to the scroll pane, or sorry, the list to this thing. We're going to add the scroll pane instead. So the scroll pane contains the scroll bars plus the thing inside it that's supposed to scroll, and since it's one object now, I'm just going to add that all at once. And if you do that, and I get rid of my song JList, be a better name, there we go. And run that thing. Now all of a sudden this thing will have scroll bars on it if we start to get more of them in there. So let's just do that. Let's just dump a whole bunch more songs. See if I can make the list actually show the scroll bars. Make sure I add them all. Pretty close. So there's a whole whack of songs in there, just to see if I can get the scroll bars to happen. They don't happen by default, although there is a setting for default. Oh look, now I've got scroll bars on the thing, even though I named my songs all the same.
You really like that song.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it Michael Bolton?
It could be Michael Bolton. Okay. Now, it turns out that we actually don't need this one anymore, the no song thing, because what we can do here instead is we can set one of these things as the default, right? Or we can just have it show up as the selected one instead. So, sure, why don't we do that? Make the GUI a little fancier. So what happens is in the action listener, when we say that's the current song, we could, I guess we don't know its position though, do we? Well, that's unfortunate. Oh, okay, that's okay. We'll do it this way. I'll make another, but this isn't maybe the right way to do it, but I'll do it anyway. Current song position. Make a variable for it. We'll set current song position to -1 to say there isn't a song, and then every time we go forward with the action listener and play next song, we're almost, I'm one out, but that's okay. We'll make that thing increase. Actually, I'm gonna just, yeah, sure. And then what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to say, song J list, set selected index to the current song position. That's sort of almost right, but you'll get the idea. And run it again. And we don't have one now, but we will soon. Now every time you click forward, it moves along to the correct one that it's supposed to, so you can see which is the currently selected song. It's disappeared off the list now, so I haven't done that one. Okay. Haven't done the back button, but the back button would be sort of the same.
Is there a quick way to be able to select from the list the song?
Well, that would be the next step, right? So now there's a double click listener, so you can set up a listener so that when somebody in this thing, actually there's a click listener, right? So the list has a click listener, so you add an action listener to the list to say, if somebody clicks on this, let me know, because if somebody clicks on that, then you're gonna have to somehow advance the player to the correct thing. So it's all the same game, right? This is an action, so there's, if you're clicking on it, there's an action listener that'll do that for you.
This is kind of jumping back a little ways. Excuse me. Could you use a set default close operation to make it so when you click X, when you X out the window, it actually terminates the program?
Yeah.
As opposed to
Yeah, it used to be the
having to-
default, or it has been the default at some time, but it keeps changing. Yeah.
If that's just a matter of the default changing, that you actually have to close, like stop the operation
Yeah.
inside Eclipse?
Yeah, there's another thing here. He's talking about here, when I close this thing, it doesn't actually go away.
It just hides
It just basically hides the window. There's another option where you can, it's called set default on close, so you can talk to the frame, and we can, actually, we might as well do that. Sure. Mainframe dot set default close operation, and that has to be, oops, I missed it. Okay, we'll do it again. was going to tell me what they were, since they're just constants. Set default close operation to exit on close. Thank you. So that just says when I click the close bar to do that, oh, it's actually J-frame on the front of it. Say where it comes from. There we go. That's the other way of getting it. So that's just a constant that says when that happens, close it. And I think that's just that's just a residual underscore. There we go. Okay, so that'll fix that problem. One other just sort of last thing, just to show you. What tends to happen with these GUIs is that there's going to be bits and pieces of it that sort of belong together, right? So in this case, you know, the forward and the back buttons sort of belong together as a group of operations to make the thing happen. And so what you can do, oh, look, it actually quit. What you can do there is you want a grouping mechanism to group those things together. And so what I'm going to do here is the grouping mechanism is called a J panel, and we'll call this the button panel. So we'll make a new J panel. And when we've got our button panel, it's the same sort of game here. I'm going to take the forward and back buttons and I'm going to dump them into the panel. So I'm going to add the forward and back buttons to the panel. And then down below, instead of adding the forward and back buttons separately, I'm going to add the panel, which I called, already forgotten, button panel. So I guess in web terms, a JPanel is a div. So it's just a way of grouping some visual elements together, and then you add them all at once. And so now when we run this thing, it'll still run and those things will be grouped. Still doesn't look like much, except there's a grouping mechanism. So let's just do jpanel dot something here. I can remember what it is. Button panel dot come on, I want the sets. Set border, new beveled border, if I'm lucky. Oops, went the wrong way. Okay, I'm a little stuck here for the moment. I can't remember the name of the border class.
No, I think it's just B-E-V-E-L, bevel border.
No, new bevel border. Well, while we're at it, oh, look, it likes bevel border. Before I go away, it almost likes it. It takes some arguments. It looks like it takes a bunch of weird stuff. But while we're at it, let's just go over to the Java APIs. Here's all of the Java APIs. And there's this thing here shows all of the classes that you can use in Java that are pre-made. This thing here shows them grouped into different functionality. And so if we go down to javax.swing, there's subclasses of things, and there just happens to be a section on swing borders. And my screen's probably not going to update in a reasonable time, would be my guess. But you can go there, you can find out what a bevel border actually is supposed to look like through all of the documentation and hook it up. So I'll hook that one up in the sample code that I post, and what will happen is all of a sudden those buttons will have a nice little border around them to visually group them. Okay. One last thing, how would we enter songs? Yeah, I mean, what we'd do is we'd make, there'd be some little section down at the bottom of the window that said, pretend you're putting a new song onto the player, whatever it is. What we'd do is we just put in a little text field where people type the name and the 3 fields worth of text that they wanted, and there'd be a button that said add song, and there'd be a listener for add song that did what?
Took the input from the text box and plugged
Takes
in the song.
input from the 3 different fields, the title, the artist, and the integer for the length of the thing, and makes a new song object, and then dumps the song onto the player, right? So that the player is remembering it, and then what else does it have to do?
Update the list.
It has to visually update the list, because the visual element now needs one more title listed in it, so it has to do that. And so you start to see that it's just sort of the same thing all over again. But notice the whole point of this exercise was to show you that it all started with that iPod class underneath, because that's the thing that's really controlling all of the idea of what have we got now on our iPod, and the rest is just really the visual experience to translate that thing that we've been doing internally. And with that, we're out of here.